He's also the founder and director of California Islamic University that has its campus right up the street from Masjid Omar. And it's a full-time Islamic university that offers classes in all the different Islamic sciences. Also a member of the Fiqh Council of North America, the same council that Dr. Siddiqui is part of. So alhamdulillah, he has many good things that alhamdulillah he's doing within the community with a long other list. But alhamdulillah, more importantly, he's here with us tonight to cover the topic of marijuana usage in Islam and other intoxicants in general that we could kind of go over. And a lot of you might have certain questions, and we'll definitely go over that towards the end. So without further ado, inshallah ta'ala, as we get his PowerPoint up in a little bit, inshallah we'll start with the program.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Alhamdulillah wa salatu wa salamu ala rasulillah wa ba'd. So today is going to be a talk about the Islamic perspective on marijuana, and it's a little bit academically involved, only because it's a subject which a lot of people have many confusions about. And I'll tell you honestly, when I started preparing for this presentation a few years ago, I actually went into it having a certain perception of what cannabis and what marijuana is, and also the Islamic perspective. And I'll tell you, after about 30, 40 hours of research, I actually changed a lot of my perspective on the topic. So hopefully, you might see some change in your own perspective. That doesn't mean you're going to go start getting high in the parking lot, but it just means that there's a little bit more nuance or understanding of this topic that we need to have as Muslims. So without further ado, we'll get started. I have a detailed presentation with a lot of different slides. While the slides are coming up, hopefully they'll be coming up soon, I'll just start with what I have. So let's start with what is marijuana, first of all. Right? How would you, when you hear the word marijuana, what's the first thing that comes to your mind? Can anyone tell me? Can make this a little bit interactive. Okay, you hear marijuana, you think of intoxication. Okay, anything else? Bad stuff. Okay. Okay, so not so much what comes to your mind, but what is, if someone asks you what is marijuana, what would you say? It's a plant. Okay. It's a what? It's a leaf. Okay. Anyone else? It's a drug. Okay. Anyone else? It's illegal. Okay. But that's kind of not a direct description. More of a direct description. What is it? Anyone else? Besides drug, it's a leaf, it's a plant. Anything else? Medicinal use. Okay. So we get certain ideas that are conjured up. Okay. So basically, marijuana is a nickname for a cannabis plant which has been prepared in a specific way. Okay. So the marijuana is actually a nickname. It's not actually the real term for something. So the real marijuana is actually referring to a part of a cannabis plant when it's prepared or grown in a specific way. Now the word cannabis is actually the name of the plant itself. And the Arabic word for cannabis is qinnab. And if you look at books throughout Islamic history, you'll find the word qinnab throughout books, hundreds, thousands of Islamic books talking about this plant. So it's not like something that has not been known. The plant itself has been known for a very long time. It's been spoken about throughout history. People have known it for a very long time. And there's very different strains of cannabis. There's cannabis sativa, there's cannabis indica, and there's many other strains. These are the two most popular strains of the cannabis plant. So it's a plant, and I'll be having a picture up very soon. But each part of this plant is going to be used differently and harvested differently depending on what you want to do with that plant. So you can produce hemp from the cannabis plant, and it comes from cannabis sativa normally, and you can use it for industrial use. So for example, hemp is used to make clothing, it's used to make paint, it's used to make insulation in buildings and all of that. It's all coming from the cannabis plant. You could be wearing some clothes that are actually made from the cannabis plant and you may not even realize it. This building might be insulated with the hemp coming from the cannabis plant and you may not realize it. Does that mean that there's marijuana inside these walls, or that your shirt is made from marijuana? No, not necessarily, because there's a difference between the cannabis plant, and the nickname marijuana, weed, Mary Jane, all the other terms that come out. So if you grow the cannabis plant in a specific way, where the leaves are going to have a high concentration of a substance that's known as THC, which is going to cause psychoactive effects, when you smoke it, or when you inhale it, or when you eat it, it's colloquially known as marijuana. It's only if the cannabis plant leaves are grown in a specific way and they're prepared in a specific way that it's called marijuana. And it's also nicknamed, weed, grass, Mary Jane, pot, bud, thousands of, hundreds of different names for it. So it's very important to make this differentiation between the plant and the end result of what type of plant you're going to be growing. So if you take the flowers of that cannabis plant, the leaves or the flowers of the cannabis plant, you prepare them for consumption. You can consume them by smoking, you can consume them by vaporizing them or vaping them, or you could just eat it straight up as an edible, and it's going to actually cause psychoactive effects if and only if there's enough THC substance inside those flowers or the leaves that is actually going to cause the psychoactive effects or getting high or intoxicated. So why do people use marijuana in the first place? So when we talk about the cannabis plant that gets you high, we're going to say marijuana. When we're talking about a cannabis plant that cannot get you high, we're not going to use the term marijuana. We're going to use a different term. Okay, we're just going to say cannabis, or we're going to say hemp, or we're going to say something else. So it's very important you have this understanding. Now, why do people use marijuana, or why do people use the cannabis plant in the first place? Well, 52% of Americans have tried marijuana at least once, including, perhaps, I would estimate, maybe 20% or more of the people in this room. Okay, that's just my assumption. Maybe 10 to 20%. Okay, you don't need to raise your hand and reveal yourself. But we're talking about half of the American population has tried it, which means it's extremely, it's used at a very high level in America. Now, cannabis has a lot of chemicals. The cannabis plant, when it's prepared in a specific way, it has a high concentration of many different chemicals, but the two most important that people care about today are two. One of them is tetrahydrocannabinol, which is THC. And the second one is cannabidiol, which is CBD. So if you can remember these two things, it's pretty important because most people now know what this is. If I gave this presentation 10 years ago and I said THC, CBD, no one has any idea what I'm talking about. Today, people have an understanding of what I mean by these two things. So understand the difference if you care a little bit about the subject. So tetrahydrocannabinol, THC, just forget the first part, just THC, is the part that causes you to get high. It's the psychoactive chemical that's in the cannabis plant. And CBD, cannabidiol, is non-psychoactive. In fact, there's research that shows that the higher concentration of CBD inside of a cannabis plant, the more it's actually going to impair or stop the effects of THC. So the higher CBD, the less effect any THC that happens to be in the product is actually going to have. So most people want this plant. They care about the cannabis plant. If they're not producing hemp, then they want the cannabis plant for the THC. That's where the real value is, because it causes psychoactive effects. So what ends up happening is, psychoactive effects means that when you consume this, it's going to alter your experience of reality. So what happens? Well, there's different stages. The first stage, depending on which strain you're taking, depending how much THC there's going to be in the product, you're going to first get buzzed. Getting buzzed is this initial stage where you begin to have a distorted perception of things around you. The second stage is called getting high. And when you get high, oh, we're there? Good, alhamdulillah. So let me, yeah, I'm just, did you plug in the clicker? Can you plug it in a different USB port? So, we'll give it a you upgrade from Windows 95 to like some something else? Huh? You have another clicker? Oh yeah. Okay, perfect. Yeah. So let's go forward. Forward. Okay. Keep going. Is that a wireless mouse? Oh, okay. There. So we got cannabis sativa, cannabis indica. Keep going. That's hemp. Keep going. That's, you can smoke it. Keep going. You can take a bong and inhale it. Okay, yeah. So this is an interesting slide. I'll come back to this. So there's edibles. So you can actually eat the cannabis plant with large amounts of THC. So if you look at that, you have brownies with marijuana in them. You have all these funny little candies here. Don't mistake that for Kit Kat. All right. And what you have is this bung shop. So in India, what you have is you have these bung shops that are open, and that's a type of product that has THC coming from the cannabis plant. Very similar to marijuana. So there's actually, anyone know what lassi is? Right, the yogurt drink. So there's bung lassi in India. You drink it and you'll get high. There are bung pakoras. You eat the pakoras and you're going to get high. All right, so don't do that. Okay, but I'm just saying. So the thing is, this is not just some American phenomenon or something. This is something that is even part of Indian culture. And what's interesting, if you look at that sign, it says government authorized bung shop. So when India was colonized by the British are trying to outlaw marijuana in the country. And the Hindus were responding and saying, hey, well, during one of our festivals, our annual religious festivals, we consume bung. And we have bung lassi and bung pakoras and, bung laddu and, all these different type of sweets. And this is what we do. You can't stop us. This is religious discrimination. So the British actually gave a license and said, okay, you're allowed to open these shops. Almost like 4th of July, you're allowed to have fireworks. You can't have it the rest of the year in America. You're allowed to have these shops open during this specific time of the year for Hindus to be able to have that THC, marijuana type of substance in their edibles that they consume for their, for their religious festivals. And you find a lot of Americans and stuff, hippies and stuff showing up and, getting high as well with their lassis and stuff like that. Let's go to the next slide. All right, so you can see, in smoking weed is quite popular. Like I said, over 50% of Americans have tried it at least once, and you have people, promoting it throughout pop culture. So anyone know who the guy on the right is? Snoop Dogg. Anyone know who on the left is? Who? Miley Cyrus, right? So the thing is, most celebrities are actually smoking weed. They smoke marijuana and they promote it. Not only do they do it, they promote it, right? So what happens is it becomes part of pop culture, and therefore it becomes more normalized and people become desensitized to it. All right, so again, these two terms, CBD and THC, which one is psychoactive? THC, okay? And how psychoactive is CBD? It's not. Good. Let's go next slide. All right, so this is an example of a coffee shop. No, actually it's a marijuana shop. So this is a marijuana dispensary, and if you look at it, it looks like a coffee shop, okay? In fact, it's probably cleaner and more organized than a coffee shop because they probably have more money than a coffee shop. All right, so that's what it looks like, and now in the state of California, it's become legalized. Even prior to that, there were still these shops here. So there's many shops on the 55 freeway, in Santa Ana, and all of that. So people primarily go here, and I'm going to talk more about it, but people primarily go here to get something that's going to get them, that's going to have products with a very high THC level, and that's what people are interested in the most. So the first stage is getting buzzed, initial stage of distorted perception. The second stage is getting high. When you get high, basically what happens is you have this elated, euphoric feeling. You sometimes feel overconfident in what you're going to be doing, and oftentimes you go into uncontrollable laughter. You can't stop laughing. You just laugh for no reason, for whatever reason. And then after that, usually you get stoned. So stoned basically is after the high comes off, person becomes very calm, very lethargic, and they just they're feeling in a very relaxed state. All right, so what happens is different strains are going to give you different amounts of this or a different order of this. So a sativa strain generally cannabis sativa is going to give you this more uplifting and energetic high. The indica strain is going to give you a little bit more mellow or calm type of feeling, a little bit more on the stone side than the high side. So it's important to understand that that's what people are looking for when they're going to purchase some type of product with a lot of THC. CBD, on the other hand, is actually going to block this. So some cannabis plants are grown in a specific way where they have more THC, and some are grown in a way where they have less THC. According to United States law, anything which has less than 0.3% THC content in it is going to be deemed hemp and is legal in the United States, meaning legal for all states across the board. Prior to that, prior to legalization in different states, anything which has greater than 0.3% THC is going to be considered illegal because it can get people potentially high. Okay? Now, THC content in cannabis usually varies between 5% to 35%. So if you just go to the next slide real quick, if you look at the menu in the cafe, okay, or in the dispensary, if you look at the menu, you find all of these different, strains that you can buy, and they all have nicknames, right? So you got, abusive AK-47. If you look at the THC content of them, the first one, 20.5% THC, 0.27% CBD. You go down the list, every single one has a greater than 15% THC content on the menu for the ones that are listed. You look at the CBD content, none of them have greater than 0.5% of CBD. These are the products that you primarily can buy in a dispensary, which means that the reason why people are buying these products is clearly for one purpose and one purpose only, and that is to get intoxicated or for the psychoactive effects. They're not buying it primarily for the CBD. It's very important to understand this differentiation. Why? Because when we talk about the beneficial properties of marijuana, most of the beneficial properties are in CBD. And when we understand that, and we say, well, what are people actually interested in? Are they interested in this? Or are they interested in that? Well, we'll get into that in more detail. Okay? But historically, if you go back and you look throughout history, what you find is that the cannabis plant has been known since ancient times. Okay? Hippocrates, Galen, the Greek doctors who are writing about medicine, they talked about the benefits of the cannabis plant, and they talked about the harms of the cannabis plant. So this is not something brand new, right? But for Muslims who are originally coming from Arabia, the cannabis plant was known, but the consumption of cannabis leaves and smoking of cannabis leaves was not very prevalent in the Muslim world during the lifetime of the Prophet, peace be upon him, nor was it prevalent for a few centuries later, after the Prophet, peace be upon him's time. And what happened is that Muslim scholars encountered a new product, a different product, which is known as hashish. Now, hashish, or hash, is not, it's coming from a cannabis plant. But what part of the cannabis plant is it coming from? From the CBD? No, CBD is not a part of the plant. That's the chemical in the plant. So marijuana is coming from what part of the cannabis plant? The leaves, right? That's why you see people with like lighters and shirts and stuff. There's like a giant leaf there because that's where it's coming from. Where is hashish coming from? Same plant. Not from the stem, from the resin. Okay, resin is like, trees have sap, right? So sap is a type of resin. So it's coming from like the sap of the cannabis plant, which means that normally it's more potent, it's stronger than what you'd get from the flowers. So there's a very high concentration of THC inside hashish. So hashish is solid. And what's interesting is that hashish is something that was encountered in the Muslim world. A lot of people throughout were using it a few centuries after the Prophet ﷺ. Today, in Europe, half of the consumption is marijuana, like cannabis, smoking from the flowers, and half of the consumption is hashish. Whereas in America, it's almost entirely marijuana and hashish is almost unheard of. So it's a cultural thing. Right? There's some historical reasons for why people do this drug versus that drug or whatever it is. So hashish was something that was known. It was not prevalent or even known during the lifetime of the Prophet, peace be upon him, in the Muslim world. So when Muslim scholars encountered hashish and another product called bunj, which is like bung, like I mentioned to you in India, which is sometimes known as henbane. We're not going to get into the details of that. But Muslim scholars have been writing about this. Why is this interesting? This is really interesting because, let's go to the next slide. All right, if you go through the library of books on Islamic law, right, people oftentimes don't realize this, but the books are full of discussions on hashish in Islamic law. You have Muslim scholars by the hundreds talking about hashish, its effects, what Islam says about it, why it's not mentioned in the Quran, what Muslims should do about it, and all of that stuff. And unfortunately, many people don't realize that hashish is coming from the exact same plant that marijuana is coming from. It's cannabis plant, number one. Number two, Muslim scholars have been writing about this for hundreds of years, for centuries. It's not like some brand new issue that no one has ever encountered before, and you find like some scholar sitting in Arabia like, oh, I've never heard of marijuana before, there's something going on in America. No, this has been known. It's very well known and it's very well documented. So this is interesting because if Muslim scholars have already been discussing it, that means that they've had hundreds of pages of discussions on it. So there's an entire book, let's go next slide. There's an entire book called Zahrul Arish fi Tahrim al-Hashish by Imam al-Zarkashi. Imam Zarkashi is a well-known scholar. Many people study his book in Al-Azhar, right, on Ulum al-Quran. Most of the Islamic universities in the world, they study his books, well-known Shafi'i scholar. But a lot of people don't know his writings about hashish. Most people are not aware that there are entire separate books written on hashish, that most chapters of Islamic law books talk about hashish in the different chapters. And when I say most people don't know, I mean most scholars don't even know. So even if people, when they go into seminary, they study in Azhar, they study in Medina, study in France, study in other Islamic universities out there, right, wherever they're studying, they're not encountering these discussions for different reasons. One, because the Islamic studies program need a little bit more specialization, or they need some more depth. That's number one. Number two, they're dealing with other issues and so many other issues. But what's interesting is if Muslim scholars have been talking about it, there's a lot of research that's already being done. So when you go through the research, what you find is you find detailed discussions about what scholars had to say about hashish, and what they said about hashish applies exactly to marijuana today. So we're not reinventing the wheel. The research has already been done on this. This is not some groundbreaking research that anyone is bringing up. So let's take some of the discussions that were mentioned in this book. Okay, so Imam Zarkashi quotes many other scholars. He says that Sheikh Ibn Taymiyyah was the strictest in this regard in terms of his stance and his opinion on hashish being one of the things that's going to destroy society. He's saying that people become addicted to it, people are losing their life over it, and he's saying that there was a group of quote-unquote Sufis, people who are inclined towards mysticism, who would use hashish and they would promote it and say that it helps them in their zikr and their fikr. Zikr meaning it helps them remember Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala more. It helps them in their fikr, in their contemplation. So they're going and there's actual groups who are promoting hashish, getting high, and saying it brings them closer to Allah. Why is that interesting? Anyone think why that's interesting? Is that relevant to today? Because many people claim the exact same thing, right? People say it not only gives them a high, there are people who come and say it brings me closer to God, right? They say it helps me concentrate in my prayers. Okay, they make the argument whether or not it works or not, doesn't matter, right? The point is the same argument is being made today as was being made 800 years ago. So nothing has really changed. These discussions and the way in which people are manifesting their opinions have not changed significantly. So Ibn Taymiyyah criticizes that. Then you have during the Mamluk period in Egypt, you actually had hashish being widespread, and it was actually from the sultans or from the rulers of the times during the Mamluk period. They were condoning the sale of hashish because they were getting revenue from it. It's very interesting because the same arguments that are being made today about, it's already been made in California, about the legalization of marijuana, that it's going to be taxed. And if it's taxed, we can get this tax money, and we can use the tax money for many other benefits that the government can somehow promote. So these discussions have already existed, and they've already been done for a very long time. Now there are proponents of recreational use of marijuana, saying that, you know what, there's nothing wrong with it, we should legalize it, it's not going to be a problem. 56% of Americans find and say that marijuana is socially acceptable today. If you were to go back 20 years, probably was half that number. So what's happening is American public opinion is shifting, not only people who are doing it, but it's considered to be socially acceptable. So you just go to a gathering, you're at let's just say a bunch of non-Muslims sitting at a Christmas party, and all of a sudden, someone lights up, pulls out a bong after their Christmas dinner. It's becoming socially acceptable, normal. Now, if they have like grandparents sitting in the room, the grandparents are going to be like, what the heck are you doing? Right? But if you just have people who are under the age of 40, it becomes more socially acceptable. So the trend towards social acceptability is moving in the direction of, hey, there's no issue with it. So where does that come from? What are their arguments? What is the reasoning behind it? There's a few reasonings. Let me see if I have a slide. Yeah, so first one is, say it doesn't result in any violent behavior. So what's happening is they say, let's go next one. They say it's safer than alcohol. So if alcohol is allowed in society, and non-Muslims drink, their argument is, well, since we drink and we allow alcohol and there's liquor stores everywhere, technically marijuana is safer in the sense that it's not going to result in this violent behavior. So people will drink alcohol, they go home and they'll beat up their family members. No one goes and smokes and then goes home and beats up their family members, because they're going to be, by the time they get home, right, they're either going to be high and laughing at them, right, they'll laugh at their family members, or they'll be stoned and they'll just be so relaxed they'll just lie down on the sofa and just stare at TV or something like that, or stare at a wall and be as entertained as a TV show. Right? That's what's going to happen. So they're saying, well, technically the argument is, since it's safer than alcohol, we should allow it in society. It's not a big deal. Second argument is that there's so much cost for policing marijuana, and there's a racial bias behind the type of arrests that happen. So police will go and catch people with marijuana, and what type of people are going to have marijuana? Usually it's going to be either minorities or people who are coming from poorer classes. Whereas had they chosen to do more cocaine busts, guess who's going to be caught? Probably half the politicians in Congress, and a lot of the rock stars and wealthy people, and lifestyles of the rich and famous people and all of that. So there's a racial bias in the sense that they're targeting a type of drug that ends up targeting minorities as well, and that becomes unfair. So that's the second argument. The third argument is that you get tax revenue from it. So we can just tax it, we get more money, and then we can create jobs. We have the poor guy couldn't find a job, but now there's a marijuana dispensary, so we can get him a job, and that's great. In fact, when I went to visit the local marijuana dispensary as preparation for the seminar, all right, I found a Muslim working there. And the Muslim was, he enjoyed his job. He loved his job. I said, how do you like your job? I said, you're Muslim? He said, yeah, I'm Muslim. He didn't recognize me, but, I said, you like your job? He said, I love this job. I said, what's your favorite part of the job? Free samples. I said, okay. So just, tried to invite him to the masjid. I'm not sure if he came, but, so it creates jobs. That's an argument. Okay, and the fourth argument is it's going to eliminate the black market. So you have synthetic marijuana, you have different strains, people put stuff in there. So if it's already prevalent, you might as well make it safer by regulating it and giving the exact THC content, the exact CBD content, put different brands in there, let Nestle, put their brand on it and, regulate it so it becomes, more commercialized, and then it'll become safer, so at least people can get high in a safer manner. These are the four main arguments for people who say we should just legalize marijuana. It's not such a big deal. Okay? Now, as Muslims, what do? We go back and we look at it and say, okay, these arguments have some validity to them. They make some sense. It's not like there's no sense in them. They make sense. But at the same time, there's a specific stance that Islam has on those things. So what does Islam say? Islam talks about mind-altering substances by saying, first of all, that, look, first of all, you have to understand, there is no clear text in the Quran that talks about drugs. So it doesn't mention cocaine, doesn't mention marijuana, doesn't mention heroin. So people go, see, it's not in the Quran. It would have been prohibited in the Quran if Allah didn't want us to do it. Therefore, it's okay. In fact, I had one guy come and tell me, he says, you know what? Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says in Surah Al-Baqarah that Allah has created everything in the earth for us. He's talking about all the plants and everything. It's for us. So therefore, the plants, Allah created the plants for us. That includes marijuana. So therefore, I have my justification to get high. And the guy used to, smoke a lot, get high. So, the problem is it's a very poor argument. One, because there's poisonous plants, and doesn't mean you take them, right? Just because Allah is saying that He created the plants for you, that's not what it means. So people are making an argument, and it's important for us to understand what Islam says. Number one, why isn't there a clear text about drugs in the Quran? For two reasons. Number one, it wasn't prevalent during the time. So there was no need to talk about something which is not prevalent in society at the time. And number two, the ruling on intoxicating substances is already built into the Quran when it talks about alcohol. How so? Because things are based on analogy. And anything which can intoxicate you is going to actually be prohibited the same way that alcohol is prohibited. So if you look at the verses here, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala first talks about alcohol, and He says, the harm is greater than the benefit. Which means that He acknowledges that even alcohol has some benefits in it. It's not that it has no benefit. There's some benefit. Yeah, you enjoy, some people say, oh, it helps your liver, or, whatever, red wine or something like that. Anyway, you can even get the same benefits from a certain type of grape juice that doesn't have the alcohol now that's come out. So there's no need for that anyways. But Allah admits that there's some benefit. But then He says there's harm. And the harm outweighs the benefit. So the principle in Islam is, when the harm outweighs the benefit of something, it should be prohibited, you should stay away from it. Then other verse says, do not approach prayers when drunk. Why is that? Because you can't understand what you're saying. If you can't understand what you're saying, your prayers, where's the validity of what you're doing? And number three, it says, drinking alcohol is an abomination of the work of shaitan, of Satan. So avoid it completely. So there's prohibition built into the Quran on alcohol. Now alcohol is a liquid substance. Any type of alcohol, specifically wine, is one type of alcohol. Now if wine is prohibited, then beer should be prohibited because they cause the same type of intoxication. Vodka should be prohibited because it causes the same thing. Someone comes along and says, well, vodka is a different color than wine and beer. Since it's clear, maybe it's allowed because Allah only wanted to forbid these colors and not these colors. Allah didn't forbid it because of its color. Allah forbade it because of the intoxicating effect which alters your mind. So therefore, if it doesn't matter what color it is, then it doesn't matter whether it's a liquid or whether it's a solid. It doesn't matter if it's coming from this genus, this plant, whether it's coming from grapes or it's coming from rice like sake, or it's coming from, some other type of, substance, or it's coming from a cannabis plant. Anything which is going to cause the same type of principle of intoxication or mind alteration or distorting your perception of reality, even for a temporary period, it's going to be prohibited. So there's this confusion that even some Muslims have, even many Muslims have. They think that alcohol is prohibited in Islam because it's going to have long-term negative effects on your body. And that's a mistaken notion. That is not the reason why Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala prohibited alcohol. The reason why He prohibited alcohol, if there was no liver problems and there was no, there's no DUIs and there's no whatever it may be, your altered perception of reality is the reason why it's prohibited. Why? The explanation is built into the hadith over here, which basically the Prophet, peace be upon him, says, every intoxicant is khamr, meaning it's like a wine, it's like alcohol, and every khamr is forbidden. So anything which intoxicates you in any way that's mind altering, it's going to be forbidden for you for one very simple reason. And the reason is that Allah created us with the ability to distinguish between what is right and wrong. That's a differentiation that we have that animals do not have. If we get intoxicated, then we are voluntarily taking away our ability to make that moral judgment. And if you're taking that away and that's your purpose in life, that's the blessing that Allah has given you, you've taken away that blessing. Right? So people, when they get drunk, they get intoxicated, they may divorce their wife, they may steal something, they may do something, they may say something, and they say, well, I can't be responsible for that because my mind, I wasn't in my senses. But you voluntarily took yourself out of your senses. That's the wisdom behind it. And that's the reason very clearly for it being there. So there was an argument that happened in Islamic history. And the argument was, is marijuana intoxicating the same way that wine is intoxicating? This is a huge argument that I hear from a lot of people. They say, no, marijuana doesn't intoxicate you. Because the word toxic, intoxicate, comes from toxic, and the toxins that go in your body, and there's all this discussion. Basically, from an Islamic perspective, it doesn't matter what word you use. The word in Arabic is iskar. Okay? And iskar, from the word muskir, means something which takes away your intellection or your ability to reason and clouds your judgment. That is considered to be intoxicating. Doesn't matter what the real English word intoxicating means. That doesn't really matter. What matters is whether you're able to function properly or not in your mind. And the argument is, and Muslim scholars have debated this, they discussed it, and they said, well, here's the problem. When somebody gets drunk, they tend to become violent, they get into fights, they get into all these things. When someone gets high on hashish, because they were talking about hashish at the time, so the person, hashish doesn't become violent. In fact, the person sometimes becomes quite easy to get along with. You know, it's pretty nice to be around that person. Maybe they're going to sit like in the corner and they'll just be like lying on the floor and, you know, in their own little world or something like that. It's altering the mind. No, but Muslim scholars were discussing whether or not it was a similar type of insight. So they all agreed it alters your mind. But they're saying, but the effects of the mind altering is different. So does that result in any difference whatsoever? And what you have is, you have scholars actually saying some interesting stuff. So Ibn Taymiyyah, he said that hashish is muskir and it's actually more dangerous than alcohol. And he's saying why? Because there's an addiction aspect to it. And he's saying there is people spending their money on it. And there's many other host of societal problems that actually cause it to be worse than alcohol, which is different than the argument that the proponents of recreational marijuana are making. Imam al-Qarrafi from Mamluk times in Egypt, Maliki scholar, very famous scholar, he writes in his book that he says, no, hashish is not intoxicating like wine. In fact, hashish is much safer than the intoxication of wine. And he says because it's safer and it intoxicates in a different way, it should be placed in a different category. So he invented a new category, and this is mentioned in his book Kitab al-Qawaid. And he says the category it should be is that it should be called mufsid rather than muskir, because the type of iskar is different. So some people, they read that, and when they read that, they go, man, I've been searching for this for years. Finally, I got a medieval Muslim scholar, Al-Qarrafi, great Maliki scholar, saying that we can get high. And I've actually heard an imam give a lecture saying that Imam Qarrafi said it's okay to get high on cannabis, like on hashish. And it's a complete misquote and mistaken notion of what Imam al-Qarrafi is saying, because the people didn't go back and check what he was trying to really say. What he was trying to say is exactly what many Americans are saying, and that is, if you're going to compare the two in the way in which they intoxicate a person and the effects that they have on society, you can make an argument that maybe marijuana or hashish is safer than alcohol in a particular society. But he says it's mufsid and it remains haram for Muslims to ever consume. It's very clear cut on this. But he's a scholar who's trying to be objective. He's trying to be fair. This guy's not getting high himself. He's a very pious man, right? And this is where we as Muslims need to kind of be nuanced and say, okay, you know what? Yeah, we have a problem. A lot of youth are getting into drugs and marijuana and this and that. But at the same time, we need to have a balanced, nuanced understanding of the arguments that are being made in support of promotion or normalization of marijuana recreationally, and versus the fact that Muslims shouldn't be doing it in the first place. It's very important to have this balance here. So that's what Imam al-Qarafi was saying. Okay, so some people responded to him and says, no, you know, Imam al-Qarafi, you're actually wrong, because first of all, you've never gotten high. Okay, so Imam Zarkashi comes along and says, first of all, you've never done it. So where did you get the information from? Right? You got the information from other people. And if you go and ask even more people, Imam Qarafi made this argument. He says a lot of drunks, you know, commit violent behaviors. He says there's a lot of drunks, when they get drunk, they just get knocked out, they fall on the floor and they go to sleep. They don't do anything. You go in bars and stuff, they get so drunk, they're just knocked out. So they're not hurting anyone. They're not harming anyone. He said, therefore, even your argument is still weak. But just assuming that it was strong, what he's trying to say is that even though there's a different sense of intoxication that's taking place, or clouding of the intellect that takes place, they're still prohibited, but we can have a difference of what effect they're going to have in society. Okay, so what is the wisdom behind that? Let's go to the next slide. So the wisdom behind this prohibition is, if I mentioned this already, if you're intentionally impairing your judgment, I can't read from the screen, stay there, okay? This is why Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala created you, right? So marijuana, though, is the most abused illicit substance in the history of the United States and America. And there's also this debate over the rise in potency. So what's been happening is the marijuana that used to be smoked by hippies in the 60s is very different from the marijuana today. The potency has been grown in a specific way that the amount of THC is much higher. The intoxicating effects are much higher than the stuff that they were smoking back in the 60s. There's also discussion on whether it's a gateway drug, whether it's going to actually lead to you doing other drugs and starting to mess up your life even more. So from marijuana, you can go into ecstasy, and you can go into LSD, and you can go into GBH, and you can go into heroin and other stuff. There's a lot of discussion on that. I'm not going to get into the debate. And then the research on long-term effects on the brain is actually inconclusive. So what's going to happen is you're going to find people show up a slide and say, look, marijuana has this effect on your brain. Look, there's a research here. And then you can have some 14-year-old or 12-year-old kid go on the internet, Google effects of marijuana in the brain. You're going to find another article, Dr. So-and-so, released from the University of whatever, Michigan or UCLA. You say, oh, actually no. See, it's not conclusive. Long-term effects of marijuana on the brain, it's not proven to have any effects. So what you have is you have conflicting research on the long-term effects of marijuana, right? That's inconclusive. But what we do know that is conclusive, that is proven, is that people who smoke have cognitive difficulties. In some way, shape, or form, they have cognitive difficulties, number one. Number two, they have worse educational outcomes for whatever reason. For social reasons, for the reasons of whatever they're doing, they generally have worse educational outcomes in terms of they do worse in school. And number three, they lead to psychotic disorders. So the amount of psychotic disorders for people who consume marijuana, get high off of marijuana, is much higher than for people who don't. Okay, next slide. So there's solid evidence, keep going to the next one. So there's solid evidence on that the younger the individual is, the potential for greater impact, especially on memory and cognition, goes up. So even though you can't conclusively prove across all age groups, across the younger age groups, the ones who smoke when they're younger or consume when they're younger, the effects are much higher than the rest. There's a 12% reduction in the hippocampus, which is part of your brain, and 6% reduction of the amygdala, it's part of your brain as well, when you're getting high. Increases your heart rate after smoking. There's an increased potential for heart attack. There's 50 to 70% more carcinogens than in tobacco than tobacco smoke because you inhale it more deeply, whether it's from a bong or from a joint. There's a strong association between chronic use of marijuana and anxiety, and between depression and schizophrenia. So it results in a lot of things that people don't want to have. And what it's going to do is going to block the dopamine receptors in your brain. And when it does that, that's going to eventually lead to an increase in appetite and an increase in weight. So you end up gaining a lot more weight, which oftentimes ends up resulting in more stress or depression. Let's go next slide. All right. So this idea is, well, because it's legal, okay, it's fine. Because it's legal doesn't mean that like everything is, okay, now it's been legalized in California recreationally. Still at the same time, DUIs will happen when you're high and you're driving a car. It's still taking place, and they will count it as a DUI because your senses are impaired. Drug testing for jobs. So if you're smoking marijuana, you try and get a job, drug testing still takes place. It will remain in your system, and you can be tested for it, and it'll be hard for you to find a job. And you still got to be 21. So if you have it, you shouldn't have it anyways, but if you have it and you're trying to transport it across states, you could actually get arrested without even knowing it. So a lot of people, they don't realize even other legal dangers that remain even in states which have legalized marijuana. Let's go to the next slide. Okay, so now we go to the idea of medical marijuana or medical cannabis or medicinal marijuana or medicinal cannabis. The thing is, when it comes to the medicinal aspect of things, Islam has always had an exception to the rule in cases of necessity. So when you're standing and you're praying and your foot is broken, you don't have to continue to stand and pray. What are you going to do? You're going to sit and pray. You're allowed to sit and pray. So there's an exception to the rule. And if you can't sit, you can lie down. You can sit down and pray. You can lie down and pray. There's always an exception to the rule when you're not able to do something, or there's going to be some significant harm to your body. If you can't fast, you have diabetes, you have some illness, you have the flu, you don't have to fast. You make up the fast later. Same thing when it comes to things which are medicinal, they're needed for your body, and your life is being impacted significantly, and there's no other cure except in this particular thing. So when it comes to marijuana, whether or not it has THC in it, whether or not it can potentially give you some intoxication, what you find is Muslim scholars have discussed this. They've discussed whether hashish can be taken for medicinal reasons when there is a need, and they differentiated by talking about taking hashish to the point where you get some level of intoxication, and taking hashish to the point where you don't get any level of intoxication. So across the board, what you find is the Hanafi school has been the most quote-unquote liberal or permissive on this issue. And that is, they state very clearly that when it comes to unlawful medication, it is permissible to use unlawful medication if you have certain conditions met. Condition number one, it is known that the cure lies in that medication. This is not just experimental, this is not just hearsay or something like that. There's good solid research and evidence that this type of substance is actually going to help your issue, number one. Number two, there's no alternative available. There's nothing else that is going to work in the same way as this particular thing is taking place. Okay, so these are two conditions, and there's a third condition as well, but we won't get into that. The Hanafi school is very clear on this. The Shafi'i school has been quite strict, actually, generally. They've been very strict, saying that usually this is not allowed. But actually, when it came to hashish, you have some of the strict Shafi'i scholars saying that even when it comes to hashish, you have Imam al-Ruyani in Bahr al-Madhab, he's saying that it is permissible to use hashish as medicine, even if it results in some level of intoxication, as long as there is no other avenue available to you, meaning that there's no other alternative, and it's known that this thing is going to work, and a few other conditions he mentions. So that brings us to the idea or the concept of medical marijuana, right? So let me give you an example on the next slide. Okay, anyone heard of BuzzFeed News? Nobody's heard. Just raise your hand. But you heard of BuzzFeed News, right? It's a news agency, and they have some interesting articles. So there was this BuzzFeed article that came out about, I forgot when it came out. I think 2017. Okay, so it was 2 years ago, and this is before marijuana was legalized in the state of California. So what's happening is it's a hot topic, and you got articles like this coming out, which are trying to help promote the legalization of recreational marijuana. Because California medical marijuana exemptions have been there since 1998 or 98, I think. First state in the country to legalize medical marijuana cards, state of California. Okay, Golden State. So you have this article come out, and the title of the article is, "I tried medical marijuana for 30 days to see if it could cure my chronic pain." Okay, so what happened was, before this law passed saying that recreational marijuana is allowed, all of this hype came around. It says, you know what? Marijuana has beneficial properties. It has medical properties. These poor people are suffering in pain, and there's no other alternative for them. So what you have is generally you have this generation gap. You have younger people coming and saying, come on, it's not that bad. It's not that big of a deal. And you have the elder people from elder generations saying, this is drugs. Got to stay away from it. Remember that DARE officer who came in and explained all that stuff about drugs and how they're so bad for you and all of that stuff, right? We're like dating ourselves now, right? It's like, something is wrong with this. So what you have is this big debate taking place in the state of California. Articles like this come out, and they're explaining this, saying, look, there's so many beneficial properties in quote-unquote medical marijuana, we need to legalize it. So what happens is, the problem with articles like this is that they're actually true, but they can be misleading. So let's analyze this article as a good example. So there's this lady, I forgot what her name is, Kelsey, okay? So Kelsey writes for BuzzFeed News. She has a condition known as trigeminal neuralgia, okay, TN. This is a disease where she experiences pain in part of her body, on her face, that is so painful. This disease is known as the suicide disease because it is the worst pain anyone can ever feel. It's like worse than a third-degree burn in terms of the pain that she has. So there's this video, you could watch it. It shows how she wakes up at night, or in the middle of the night, or in the morning, just in sharp pain, just excruciating pain, just screaming and yelling, and it's just extremely difficult for her. So you feel sympathy for her, rightfully so. So she goes and she says, well, I've tried everything. She's had surgeries, cannot fix the problem. She did Botox injections into her face, did not fix the problem. Had a temporary relief and didn't solve anything. So she says, you know what, there's this new hype about marijuana, medical marijuana. Let me see if it can somehow help my pain, because there's a lot of talk about how marijuana can help with pain, and there's medicinal benefits and all of that. So to summarize the entire video and what happened, so she says, okay, first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to try a CBD roll-on, which has no THC content in it. So she takes a roll-on, and basically she rolls it on, and she says that roll-on helped me more than physical therapy that I've been going and spending thousands of dollars on. So she felt better from her pain than all the money she's been putting in all this physical therapy that she's going to, number one. Then she says, okay, let me try something else. She goes and gets an oil-based medicated rub. Has 120 milligrams of CBD to 20 milligrams of THC. Okay, so there's a ratio here, right? What's the ratio? Anyone figure it out? 120 milligrams of CBD to 20 milligrams of THC. I know there's some mathematicians in the audience here. Huh? 6 to 1. Thank you. All right. So 6 to 1. It wasn't that a difficult question, but mashallah. So 6 to 1 ratio, okay, of CBD to THC. Which one is the psychoactive one? The THC. Okay. So it's got a little bit of THC, mostly CBD, oil-based medicated rub. She puts it on. She goes, yeah, kind of. And she goes, okay, let me take the same thing, and I'm just going to vape it. So she gets a vape one, and she vapes marijuana, primarily CBD. She says it didn't really help so much. Then she gets an oral tincture of high-dose CBD oil, and she tries that. She says, yeah, kind of helped a little bit. Then she says, you know what? Let me just try something with a lot of THC in it. So she goes and eats one of those Keef Cats or whatever, right? She goes and eats like a marijuana brownie, and she just gets high. Okay? She said, let's see what it did for me. So she says, basically, it didn't help me at all with my pain, but the only thing that happened was I couldn't work on this article because I was just laughing around, walking around the house and staring at things, and I didn't get any work done. But there was no effect on my actual pain whatsoever. Then she says she tried like 30, 40 different products. And she says the thing that helped me the most with my pain was one particular brand known as Charlotte's Web oil, which is CBD oil from hemp, which means that it has less than 0.03% THC, made from hemp, $150 per bottle, lasts her about a month, and she's taking this, and she says, this helped me the most. It helped me more than surgeries. It helped me more than Botox. It helped me more than physical therapy. I was in excruciating pain, for many years of my life, and this is the only thing that helped me. So what does that tell you? That tells you that this is not like a lie. This is not being made up. There is actual benefit in the cannabis plant when it comes to medicinal benefits that exist there. But what is misleading about this headline? Based upon what I just told you about the story, what is misleading about this headline? It says marijuana. Okay? And marijuana, as I defined it in the beginning of this presentation, is something which has a high THC content. So this article is basically saying, I tried medical marijuana for 30 days. No, not really. You actually tried medical cannabis primarily with CBD and very little THC, and you tried one product of marijuana which did absolutely nothing for your pain. So what actually worked was high level of CBD, very low level of THC for her problem. So this is important to understand the differentiation. So even though there's a legitimate argument saying that the cannabis plant has very good medicinal properties, most of those properties lie in the CBD aspect, not in the THC aspect. And what happens is people are trying to accomplish two things. They're trying to accomplish the medicinal benefits of cannabis, which you cannot get in other medicines, and especially opiates and stuff like that, which people are addicted to them and all of that stuff. But at the same time, they're trying to legalize recreational marijuana or make it more socially acceptable because they just want to get high. Where are Muslims supposed to be in that discussion? They should be for number one, but against number two. Where are Muslims usually? They're either against one and two, or they're for one and two. And there's no differentiation between them. And that's where the problem lies. It's very important for Muslims to have a good understanding. So coming back, the market itself in California, primarily when people go into a marijuana dispensary, are they trying to buy THC or CBD? THC. When people are trying to get into the marijuana business, Muslims want to invest into a marijuana dispensary. They want to go and buy some, plantations and start growing and buying stocks of marijuana companies. Are they primarily trying to invest in THC or CBD? THC. Okay? So that's where the problem lies. So I get these questions all the time. They say, well, you know what? Well, since technically there's medicinal benefits in cannabis and people have really difficulties with this type of pain and all of that, wouldn't it be okay if we're kind of like, if you're allowed to own a pharmacy, why aren't you allowed to own a dispensary that's going to be helping all these people who are in pain and who are in need? The problem is that you're not actually dispensing the product that is needed primarily for the people who are in pain and who are in need. Let's go to the next slide real quick. That's an example of a difference. You got, Sensi Chew. If you look very closely, what does it say on the top left corner? Non-psychoactive. Right? Non-psychoactive. That's the key. So these exist in marijuana dispensaries. Okay, if you go in there, they have these. What percentage of their sales do you think is non-psychoactive products? It's like negligible percentage, right? So when I went in there, I was going to get one of these things, and I said, I'm looking for something that has 20 to 1 THC, CBD to THC ratio. They go 20 to 1? Well, we can get you 1 to 1, 1 to 2, 1 to 5. Maybe we have 1 to 10, but like 1 to 20, I don't even know if we carry it anymore. I'm like, yeah, well, that's the one that I'm looking for. I was getting it for somebody. And then they said, he's like, but dude, they looked at me, he's like, but dude, it's not going to do anything for you. I'm like, yeah, I'm not getting it for the high part. He's like, then why would you get it, bro? Like, what would you do with that? Why would anyone want to buy that? Because that's what the business is about. The business is about getting 1 to 1. I mean, yeah, CBD oil, you could buy something called CBD oil, and it's 1 to 2 ratio or 1 to 5 ratio, and you just take enough and it'll get you high. But if you get 1 to 20 ratio, you get 1 to 40 ratio or 1 to 17 or whatever it is, it's not going to get you high, but it's going to give you the CBD effects that you're looking for, whether it's insomnia that you have, it's going to help you go to sleep. If it's some kind of pain that you have, like this lady who had this trigeminal neuralgia, or so many, different issues that people have, that's where most of the benefit lies. So that gives you a little bit on the history of, or the medicinal aspect of it, almost coming to the conclusion. So I'm going to summarize a few points. Let's go forward. So United States of marijuana, basically we have, this is a little bit old, but we got 30 states had medical marijuana permissibility, 16 CBD, 9 states had recreational. I think it's probably more than this now, 12, 13 or something like that. And it continues to grow. Now let's go to the next slide. Skip that slide. All right, Colorado. So Colorado is the first state to legalize recreational marijuana. What happened? Remember, the proponents had their arguments, right? What happened when it was actually legalized? First of all, number of marijuana impaired drivers involved in fatal crashes doubled from 10% to 20% since it was legalized. Right? So that's a huge problem in society. So the argument is, well, yeah, it's safer than alcohol, yeah, but it's still resulting in fatal car crashes with DUIs because it impairs your judgment. Number 2, Colorado experienced 14% higher auto collision claims than its neighboring states since legalization, which means more accidents are taking place. Marijuana-related emergency room visits by teens quadrupled. Okay, so why is that important? Colorado. It's important because the assumption was, remember the 4 arguments of why it should be promoted in society? Because when you legalize it, you're going to remove the black market products. And if you remove the black market products, now it's regulated. I was just joking about Nestle, but you put like some big brand on there, Johnson & Johnson or whatever, and now it's very clear the ingredients are listed, CBD is listed, and still what's happening is it didn't result in the effects that people thought it would have. The 4th thing is, Black and Latino youth arrests for marijuana possession, which were supposed to go down, right, with legalization, actually increased 58 and 29% respectively since it was legalized. Which means it didn't resolve the problem of minorities being arrested. They're still being arrested for marijuana possession because you're allowed to possess certain quantity, for personal use, not larger quantities for dealing unless you're, a dealer, not a dealer, but like you're a licensed dealer or whatever, dispensary or something. Cooler name for a drug dealer, basically. So that didn't work. So all those arguments that people were making and saying, oh, this is great, we're going to get this money, and the only thing they got was tax money. The tax money, what do you do with extra tax money? You can just put it into a military budget and bomb some other countries, right? So that's great. So that doesn't work very well. Let's go to the next slide. Oh yeah, go back one quick. College students with access to recreational marijuana on average got lower grades and were failing classes at a higher rate, even in Colorado, when it was legalized. Let's go to next slide. So there's a lot of politics. So the conclusion is, just take that quote away while I talk. Okay, because people are going to start reading it. So here's this, the thing is this, is that many Muslims voted for legalization of marijuana, recreational marijuana, in the state of California. That's the reality. There were Muslim organizations in California who are promoting the legalization of recreational marijuana among Muslims for the 4 reasons that I mentioned about why they're proponents of marijuana. The problem, the reason why they were doing that is because even though those 4 arguments are good in theory, they thought that Islam prohibits marijuana on an individual level, but on a societal level, they're kind of thinking along the lines of Imam Qarafi. It's not so bad, it's not going to really be a big problem. We're going to reduce the amount of arrests. We're going to reduce the amount of investment in police activity. Police can focus on something else. All those arguments that were made. The problem is, number one, the legalization of recreational marijuana did not have the effects in Colorado and in other states that they assumed that it would have, even though the arguments were hypothetically sound. And number two, what they didn't realize is the more you legalize or the more you normalize something within society, the more it's going to come back and have an effect on the Muslim community as well in their perception of what is good and bad in society. And that is a big problem. As you can't solve all the problems through one political policy. So this is where this quote comes in. So let's go to the quote. So this is a specialist of, what's this guy's name again? From Stanford University, Keith Humphreys. He's a drug policy expert. He basically says, there is no framework available in which there's not harm somehow. We have different variables. We have freedom to do whatever you want, pleasure, have fun, health, crime, and public safety. Okay? These are 5 variables that people are considering when they're making a political decision on whether to pass a law or not pass a law. He says you can push on 1 or 2 of those, maybe 3, but you can't get rid of all of them. You have to pay the piper somewhere. Okay? So what basically he means is, okay, if you want to have some freedom and pleasure in your society, it's going to take a toll on health. You want to help reduce crime, it's going to take a toll on public safety. It's going to take a toll. You're going to have to restrict certain freedoms in order to prevent some type of crime. You're going to have to put more regulations if you want health to be improved. This is all from a secular framework. From an Islamic framework, Muslims are not going to be getting high in the first place. But what effect is this going to have on society? We need to be more intelligent and more nuanced on the political decisions that we're taking. And I'm going to be very frank and candid with you here. Okay? And Dr. Siddiqui and I have been discussing this for a long time. The Muslim community, since September 11th, has seen a rise in Islamophobia going higher and higher every single year. Number one. Number two, because of that, the Islamophobia tends to come from the right-wing political party, right? The conservatives, the Republicans, Tea Party, all of that stuff. So what happened is that before September 11th, before the rise in Islamophobia, most Muslims in America used to ally themselves politically or at least morally with the conservative party because of their moral stances, not necessarily because of their political or economic stances or something like that. And what happened was, because there's Islamophobia coming from this party, Muslims all of a sudden shifted and began to ally themselves completely with the liberal party or with the progressive party or with basically left-centered parties. And what happens is, when you ally yourself entirely with the party, you begin to adopt all the policies and the mentalities of that party. And this is what's happening with the Muslims today. So their perception on marijuana, their perception on homosexuality, their perception on transgenderism, their perception on pluralism or whatever it may be, whatever the other topic is, healthcare or whatever, it's going to be completely allied with left-wing American politics. And what happens is, oftentimes, that is not necessarily something that is beneficial to the Muslim community, nor is it necessarily beneficial to American society as a whole. So if we view ourselves as Americans, as people who live here, and we care about this society, we should not just be making political decisions based upon what we think is going to benefit us because someone is going to, since we're supporting them, they're going to support us, that type of mentality, right? This survival, mentality of, otherwise everyone's against us. But instead, we should be making principled decisions on what's going to be best for our society and that's where we need to be more intelligent when it comes to these decisions. Do I have any other slide, or we're done? We're done. So 9 o'clock on the dot, Q&A, right? So we have time for questions. So the summary, in case anyone misunderstood me or didn't understand what I'm saying, let me just clarify again. Muslims, it's prohibited, haram for you to get high. Number one. Number two, if most of the medicinal benefit properties is in CBD, which doesn't make you high, so it would be almost fine to take CBD in any amount for the medicinal benefits. If there's proven medicinal benefits in some level of THC, if there's no alternative treatment and it's proven that this is going to work, then there's a medical exception even for that as well. Fourth thing, politically, Muslims need to rethink their perspectives on what is going to be good for society as a whole versus what is going to give us points with the political party so that they support us. And our alliance with the left is something which needs to be reconsidered. That doesn't mean we ally with the right either. It just means that we should be more principled as Muslims in supporting different parties on causes that we agree with, on a cause-by-cause basis. Whether it's abortion, whether it's homosexuality, whether it's unemployment, whether it's healthcare, whether it's increase in fair wages, whether it's border security, it should be on a case-by-case basis. It should not be on a party-by-party basis. Okay? So that's the summary of the presentation. Okay, questions now. You gonna pass it around?
So my question is about medicinal marijuana, that generally speaking, the doctors prescribe medicine and it is taken under the supervision of the doctor. So this decision for medicinal marijuana should be under that umbrella, that it's not an individual decision making, it is under supervision of some expert, and they say for your disease, for your cause, it should be prescribed and it should be monitored. So can you make a comment on that?
I agree with you in principle. There's a problem. The problem is most doctors have not been trained in understanding the effects of cannabis at all. So they have very little training in that, number one. Number two, the pharmaceutical industry is very powerful and they bankroll the medical schools. So what happens is if the pharmaceutical industry until now has not been involved, there's only at least 2 years ago, there was only two medicinal marijuana products that were approved by the FDA. So that means that the pharmaceutical industry has not really invested into this much, which means that the doctors don't know about it because they're highly influenced by the pharmaceutical industry. So even though in theory, exactly what you said should be the case, it's not the case, because what the doctors will do instead is they're just going to give you opioids, which can potentially be much more harmful than the cannabis products that are out there. So it's getting to that point where now it's becoming more normalized, but at the same time, the recreational use is also becoming more normalized. So you're getting both at the same time. But that is what should be happening. It can't happen right now because most physicians don't have any understanding, nor do they have a license to even prescribe something which is technically banned by the FDA. So technically, the FDA has still not removed, or at least from the last 1 year ago I checked, they had still not removed marijuana from as a Scheduled 1 controlled substance. That's a federal government. Okay, so states have legalized this, states have done this. The federal government of the United States, for the last 70 years or so, has basically said that marijuana or cannabis is a Schedule 1 drug, which means that it's harmful and it has absolutely no medicinal value at all. That's the federal government position. Now the states have overridden the federal government in this case on an individual basis. That's the way America works. Sometimes the states override the federal government, sometimes federal government overrides the states. When it came to gay marriage, for example, California had passed a law against it, the federal government overrode California. Here, federal government says marijuana has no medicinal benefit. The state of California overruled the federal government, says, no, we believe it has medical benefit. That's just the politics of America. So technically, because it's still prohibited by the federal government completely, you can't have doctors actually even prescribing it at the moment. So there's a lot of politics that's involved in this. As the industry changes, it'll get there eventually, so that Muslims are not, or people are not abusing it on the side. So the argument now is, in the meantime, while we're waiting for that to happen, are we better off getting addicted to opioids? Or are we better off, experimenting with like CBD or something like that? It's a tough decision to make, but it seems like the evidence would be you're probably safer trying out some kind of high CBD product than it is, getting addicted to, these other drugs that are being given to you by your doctors, and the pharmaceutical companies are making a ton of money off. All right, and we got huge addictions in schools, high schools and middle schools, and especially upper class students. They're, taking Xanax, and they're taking all sorts of different Adderall and stuff. It's just not because they have any issue. They're just addicted to it, and they have become dependent on it, and it's a lot easier to purchase, and it's easier to get away with it than any other type of illegal drug. Other questions? Yes. Mike is coming.
So recently there's been a lot of discussion, especially like the peers and stuff like that in the young Muslim community, about whether or not the the Islamic ruling of like if you were intoxicated you can't pray, or that your salahs won't be accepted for the next 40 days. So it was kind of like a collaborative question asked by a friend, and I'm asking it to you. Does that rule, like the 40-day no prayer rule, apply to when you've smoked marijuana, or is it only for like the other intoxicants?
So that hadith is specifically talking about prohibited food in your stomach. If you've taken something prohibited, then your du'as are not going to be accepted. Prayers are not going to be accepted for 40 days. Any type of prohibited food prohibited substance would fall into the same category, right? So, yeah, it probably is a good idea to have the understanding that this warning applies to anyone who's even going to be taking an intoxicant like marijuana. So it'd be in the same category. But there's a caveat, and the caveat is that some people, when they hear this, they go, oh, well, then that means if my prayers are not going to be accepted, I'm not going to pray for 40 days. That's not what it means. What it means is that you still have an obligation to perform your prayers, but the likelihood of your du'as getting accepted during that time is going to be lower because you're disobeying Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So it was designed to threaten people and warn them, you better only put permissible things inside your body. Don't eat anything haram, don't consume anything haram. It's going to have an effect on, your connection with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, which is definitely, the meaning is true, even when it comes to smoking marijuana. So I would tell those people that, yeah, you can consider that in the same category, and you should be avoiding it even more. Does that answer that question? Other question?
This is on the behalf of the 10% one over here. So for khamar, right, it's haram, and you can get khamar in the hereafter. Same with weed, right?
Okay. Are you part of the 10% that you're asking on their behalf?
I'm just playing.
Okay. Just wanted to clarify that. You seem to represent them very well. So the question is, wine is mentioned in the Quran that it's going to be something that people will get in paradise. And the wine that they're talking about is obviously not the fermented grapes, but it's a different type of wine that people are going to have in paradise, which, if you get intoxicated in paradise, it's not a problem because your moral judgment is not needed because the test of life is over. So you can relax, basically. So technically, in paradise, you can get whatever you want. So, you know, if you ask Allah subhanahu, He says, if you ask whatever you want in paradise, you can get it. So yeah, that's a good question. You know, if you're like, you know, I always wonder what heroin would be like. Yeah, inshallah. Ask Allah in Jannah, inshallah. You can get high in Jannah. It's perfectly fine. Inshallah. You probably won't even want to get high because you're going to feel like high anyways all the time. It doesn't go away. It doesn't go down. You know, inshallah, may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala give us Jannah. But yeah, some people try to rush to it and they want to get, you know, Jannah on earth, but your Jannah is like, you know, an hour and then it becomes Jahannam. You know, so that's the problem. So may Allah protect us. But yeah, inshallah, you know, you can get whatever you want in paradise.
I think in the Quran it says that the wine you will get in Jannah will not be an intoxicant. It's not gonna. You will not lose your conscious decision making even in Jannah. Now, coming back to this one, what is the logical, rational thinking for youth to consume these products? Because when I was growing up, I never had a desire. So I just want to get your point of view when you research these individuals or these systems. What is a logical decision making for youth for consuming?
It's simple. The logical reason is that it's fun. That's it. It's fun. So sometimes people, they're like, oh, it's too serious. I just want to relax. It's like when people watch movies, it's like an escape from reality, right? So a lot of people, they go and get drunk, they go to a bar because they want to escape the miserable life that they're in. They put themselves into. So the same thing when it comes to drugs. Oftentimes it's fun. It's like, oh, it'd be nice to just kind of let lose control and have the experience. It feels good. The reality, it feels good when you're high. Okay? So they just want to feel good. So again, if we try to negate it and say, no, it doesn't feel good. It does feel good, but it's going to have a lot of problems later on, right? Like committing zina. Feels good in the moment, but it's going to result in problems later on. So that's the simple answer. The simple answer is because it feels good. I mean, if you inject heroin into your body, then probably we don't even have 1% here with heroin. You probably wouldn't have made it here. You'd be searching for more heroin on the street right now. So if you put heroin in your body, you're going to feel amazing. It's going to feel absolutely amazing for a period of time, and then you become dependent on it, and your entire life's going to be ruined. So it does feel good in the moment, but the effects are not worth it. Marijuana has a less effect than that, less dependency than heroin, but people want to do it because it feels good. That's why. And they're not, and they put the risk of dangers coming from it. They put it to the side, in the back of their mind. That's the reason. And the second is peer pressure as well. So even those who are scared and they're like, no, I'm debating. Have fun, danger. Have fun, danger. The peer pressure comes in. Come on, man. Just try it once in a while. It's not a big deal. I've done it before. I know other people. It's exaggerated. No, I mean, UCI, my professor used to try and convince us to do drugs. Like half of his lectures were convincing us to do drugs. It's very weird. He won like Professor of the Year, right? Probably for that reason. You know, so, and he's still there actually. He's still a professor in computer science department. He used to tell us, yeah, you can go, you get ephedra, and I used to get speed, and I used to do this. It helps you study, and you know, if you're doing bad in your finals and this and that, he'd be promoting drugs like just openly. So it's become part of the culture. All the celebrities do it. Your professors do it. You know, your friends are doing it. Politicians are doing it. You know, George W. Bush was, you know, not promoting it, but he was snorting cocaine and stuff like that. It's proven now. It's well known. So, you know, Clinton was doing it. So, I mean, it's become part of our culture. So it's become normalized.
It's just a comment. It's such a loose end business-wise. That's why a lot of Muslim people are leaving their good jobs and stuff like that, and they just go into business.
You mean getting into the marijuana business?
Getting into marijuana business, unfortunately.
Like a dispensary?
Yes. It's not only dispensers, they even grow it.
They
They even become farmers on that.
Yeah.
Farming.
So they're leaving their jobs and going into farming.
Yeah, and or businesses.
Yeah.
It's such a shame.
Yeah, that is a
And-
shame. It's happening because they think there's money in it. Right?
There's a lot of money in there.
There's money in
That's
it,
why people
but
the
it's-
greed takes over.
There's money in liquor stores, you know, but I mean, again, Muslims shouldn't be selling liquor. Muslims shouldn't be selling drugs, whether they're legal drugs or they're illegal drugs. You know, so. Last questions before we conclude? Okay, closing remark.
Any more last questions? I'd like to thank Sheikh Mustafa. Obviously, this is a difficult topic to go over. There's obviously a stigma behind it, but the more we educate ourselves, inshallah ta'ala, we could benefit ourselves, and then also we could obviously, inform others and spread that. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala bless him, inshallah ta'ala reward him, and end with the dua, inshallah ta'ala.
All right. اللهم أنت السلام ومنك السلام تبارك ربنا يا ذا الجلال والإكرام ربنا آتنا في الدنيا حسنة وفي الآخرة حسنة وقنا عذاب النار. Oh Allah, help us to see the wisdom in your commands and prohibitions that you have prescribed for us. Oh Allah, help us to stay away from the things you have prohibited, and only help us to do things which please you and which bring us closer to you and closer to Islam. Oh Allah, help the young people who are struggling with the temptations in this society and in their lives. Allah, help them make the right decision to stay away from those temptations. Allah, help them to have good friends and keep themselves surrounded with friends which will bring them closer to you and not those which will take them away from you. Ameen. Subhana rabbika rabbil izzati amma yasifun wa salamun ala al-mursaleen walhamdulillahi rabbil alamin.
Jazakallah khair. Once again, may Allah bless you. Just a little note, we do have food in the cafeteria. There's burgers and falafel there. I want to thank everyone for attending tonight and not being too afraid and shy for attending a program like this. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala bless you. Inshallah, we'll see you guys. Oh, there's also a youth hike tomorrow at 7 a.m. at Peters Canyon Regional Park. If you want to attend, this will also be done with Masjid Omar Farouk and their youth group. So, inshallah ta'ala, you're all invited. Barakallahu feekum.